Majority of Africa's leaders who went to Washington to mark what the White House hopes for a new era of cooperation expect tangible results and not just a trip to the U.S. and grandstanding. While plans for the first African Leaders Summit this week are ambitious, the reality is that the United States is still having strides to make on the kind of political and economic relationships in Africa that can benefit both sides. There are over 24 billion U.S. exports of goods to sub-Saharan Africa, with South Africa benefiting $7.3 billion worth of imports. But what is the timing of the summit while Europe, India and China had held the same event? And how will Africa develop comprehensively if other countries like Sudan, Eritrea and Zimbabwe are excluded? To discuss this and other issues around the summit, we are joined from our Cape Town studios by Professor Nicholas Bifke from the University of Cape Town's Department of Development Finance. And of course, he's also the president of Africa Growth Institute. Good afternoon to you and welcome to our program.
Good afternoon to you and to your listeners.
Well, firstly, when President Obama took office in 2009, many hoped for strengthened U.S.-Africa ties, but he has not achieved much in terms of this. So is this not too late for this, since his last term is about to expire?
Well, if you look at when he took office, America had their own challenges, and maybe Africans understood the economy of America was really on its knees. So I don't think Africans expected a lot. But I think what he missed was that at the time he took office, China was very aggressive, and other emerging markets like Brazil and India were very aggressive. And that should have sent a signal that Africans probably need also to move forward. And I think that was where he lost it. But I think at the moment he still got some 1 or 2 years to go. And I think if he lays the foundation, and that's what he's trying to do, and then push it for the period that he's going to stay as president, I think it's not too late. But I think also it depends on the African leaders. They can't keep visiting these countries and then having dinners and coming back home and not doing anything about that. I think they also need to look at their own, what is it that they need from the rest of the world.
So what is going to improve, since we have over $15 billion trade between South Africa and the U.S., especially with the financial year of 2013-2014, and it's $1 billion injection, the $14 billion injection, enough for the whole continent, given that we have various challenges as the African continent in as far as economic development?
I think if you look at the quantity of the money, that is not enough. But I think it's beyond that. It's far beyond that. Is the idea, is the concept, is the business community, the small business that are going to come together. Is the whole concept, the whole package that is going to do the trick. If you take 14 billion and divide among African countries, I mean, if you look at proportional term, that is actually like a drop in the ocean. But that is not the key thing. I think the thing is that it sort of pushes governments to realize that, look, for the first time, the U.S. is looking into Africa. And I think that's the first step. And I think the Americans are not saying that this is the maximum they can produce, they can actually support. I think there's much to come. But I think all depends on when our leaders come, how they actually utilize the kind of opportunities they've gained there. Also, you must remember when they met other organizations, companies, and individuals who also want to invest in the continent. So it's more than the 14 billion. I think there is still a lot which I call dormant support that the U.S. can actually provide.
Mm-hmm. And since the G8 summit in Edinburgh some few years back, leaders of developed countries pledged billions of dollars in aid to Africa, and nothing has happened since. We've heard even during the era of President Thabo Mbeki, former President Thabo Mbeki, that there was nothing because Africa was not going to that summit with cap in hand to expect developed countries to donate funds, but rather Africa wanted to do something for itself. So why have a separate summit like, the Euro-Africa Summit, the India Summit, as well as the China-Africa Summit as well? Is this not divisive of African countries, given the economic interest that these countries have on the continent?
Yeah, I think that's the one way of looking at it. But also, it's business. It's business. Africa wants to develop, and I think China, India, South Korea, and the rest, even the Europeans, they all understand that. Africa is the last empire that got a lot of kicks, and everybody wants their share of that. So I think they understand that. And I think it's also pretty clever, because then you don't have to rely on one person, one institution, or one country now Africa have got choices. In the old days, you go to the European Union, they give you rules and regulations, and then they are kicked out. Now they know that if Europe doesn't own up, then Africa can always go to China or the US or other, But I think, again, coming back to the whole thing is nice if something comes out of it. But if they come home, and if you look at Asia, when they go to these meetings, they also they go back with something. Because when they go there, they get something out of it. And I think Africa needs to bear that in mind, because, as I mentioned, they can't be visiting all these countries and then coming home and no projects are in place, no capacity is being developed, and then they expect development to happen. It's not going to happen. And I think our leaders really need to pay attention to that, because it's more than almost 50 years since African countries gained independence. We still can't pretend as if we don't know the route. We know what's going to happen, but I think our leaders really need to call a spade, and then know that it's in their own interest to implement some of these things, and to some of the benefits they get abroad to come and implement that in the continent.
Okay, Professor, I'm hard pressed for time, but I need to ask you this question, because if the #1 world economy is trying to establish US-Africa relations in as far as economic and trade and development is concerned, should China be concerned about this move by the US, since it also wants to be a strategic Africa's largest trading partner?
China is already a strategic Africa's largest trading partner. I mean, and I was listening to the President, Barack Obama, saying that only 1% of the US export actually go to Africa. And China is doing more than that now. And I think that is a fear. But you see, the Chinese have got a model that the Americans shy away from. The Chinese go there, get what they want, and ask you what you want, and they give it to you. They don't try to tell you how weak you are or what you should do. So I think that's the difference, and that is where the Americans can get it wrong. The Africans I think we are tired sometimes of hearing kind of gospel being preached to us on how we should move the continent forward. The Chinese do it in a different way, and I think that's more effective. But the Americans can decide on what route they take. But I think China is probably not concerned about that at the moment.
All right. Professor, thank you very much for talking to us live from Cape Town. We're speaking there to Professor Nicholas Bibke, who is from the University of Cape Town's Department of Development Finance, and of course, the president of the Africa Growth Institute, talking to us right here on PM News.